There's an old African proverb: those who have no fence around their land have no enemies. But when employment and wealth depend entirely on the land that you own, a fence might seem like a jolly good idea. In rural Kenya, traditional work and livelihoods depend on land title. And that's the theme this week for the meditations of our regular letter writer, Wycliffe Muga.
The reason generally given for the setbacks suffered by the Democrats in the recent midterm elections in the US is that American voters always punish the party in power if the unemployment rates are too high. This, to a large extent, explains why the issue of land ownership is such an explosive one in much of sub-Saharan Africa. If about 70% of your people live off small farms in the rural parts of the country, the primary question that political leaders have to confront is not, are there enough jobs, but rather, is there enough land? To illustrate the importance of land ownership to African communities and why it can be the difference between being desperately poor and enjoying a little prosperity, consider the case of a community that struggled for almost 35 years to regain their land. This is the Endorois, one of Kenya's smallest tribes, of whom there are estimated to be only about 60,000. Back in the 1970s, at a time when Kenya's tourism sector was just beginning to expand rapidly, the Endorois, who are a cattle-herding community, were evicted by the government from their traditional grazing ground around Lake Bogoria in order to make room for a new national game park. The community took the matter to court and, after exhausting all legal remedies within Kenya, presented their case to the African Commission on Human and People's Rights based in Banjul, Gambia. Earlier this year, the Commission found that this eviction had indeed violated their rights as an indigenous people and ordered the Kenya government to restore the Endorois to their historic land and to compensate them. So will the Endorois now return to using those tens of thousands of acres for grazing their cattle? In my view, this is not likely. Much has changed since they were evicted from that land. Kenya's tourism sector has over the past decades been so successful that some of the more famous tourism attractions are quite overcrowded during the peak seasons. As such, those who can afford it tend to prefer to visit conservancies created by the lease of privately owned land to top tour companies. A pioneer in this field is the Olare Orok Conservancy, which is just outside the famous Masai Mara National Reserve. The land on which it is located was formerly Masai grazing land, and this brought conflicts between the Masai and the wildlife which roamed into their land from the adjacent game park. Then the Masai leased their land to tourism investors, and all this changed. Olare Orok and other conservancies in the area now form a thriving protected wildlife habitat on which there is a far greater concentration of free-roaming wildlife than in the game park itself. Finally, these conservancies create employment opportunities in luxury tourist camps and game lodges. So if the Endorois should follow this model for utilizing the land now restored to them, then they will not only have an income from the lease of their land, but they will have jobs as well. This is Wycliffe Muga for the BBC World Service in Nairobi.
And your thoughts, please share them with us at world.business@bbc.co.uk.